proposez-la si vous préférez.
Est-ce que vous avez un... Ça, c'est un Mac Pro? Genre, pour savoir juste, du coup, l'HDMI... Ah non, mais c'est bon, j'ai ça.
Ouais, HDMI, non mais HDMI, c'est très bien. C'est juste de ce côté-là.
Ok, bah en vrai, peut-être là, ça marche.
Mais ça va marcher, hein, je pense qu'il y a zéro problème.
Et comme c'est j'ai Alexa, il n'y a pas d'USB, mais j'ai un dock.
Sinon, on fait USB-C. Hein.
Ouais, bah c'est très bien. Et je vais vous sortir parce que du coup, pour vous, pour pouvoir avancer les slides...
On peut se tutoyer déjà, juste.
Ouais, ok.
On ne vieillit pas plus que je...
Ok, bah, donc pour toi, il y aura la télécommande.
Non, on va voir mon truc là.
Ouais.
Est-ce que je peux expliquer? Ah. Si ça il y a un truc sur lequel il faut appuyer, j'ai l'impression que c'est toujours ça qui fait. Alex. Alors c'est juste que c'est pas... Ah non si, c'est bon, j'ai derrière. Il y a un truc pour appuyer là pour changer.
Ouais, du coup la télécommande, mais vu qu'il y a un dongle USB-A, tenez. Comme ça on va les mettre à côté, et comme ça normalement ça sera bon. Et là du coup...
Le logo.
Ça c'est juste pour la télécommande. Mais donc, du coup,
Ah non, j'ai pas besoin de la télécommande, non.
Ah
ouais, non, franchement, j'ai juste besoin de projeter, t'inquiète, on va rester là.
Ok, je fais une offre, mince.
Ça va aller.
Je mets à droite, du coup ça se verra pas besoin.
Je voulais juste vérifier que du coup ça s'affiche bien ça qui s'affiche.
Ah oui,
les versions. Les versions différentes pour être là-dessus.
Ok, nickel. Attends, je vais juste...
Ouais,
c'est bon. Attends, je vais juste... Tac. Ok, c'est bon.
Parfait.
Du coup, tu peux remettre.
Les chaussettes de...
Mics are on. Yep. Perfect. Does this mic work, or do I need to bring a mic? Okay. I'm just wondering whether I need this. Okay, fine. Perfect. Yeah, let's do that.
En vrai, on peut commencer, je pense qu'il est quelle heure? Il est 33, 35. Ouais, non, je pense qu'on commence. Allez. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. And I'd like to say hello to our fellows at UPenn. So, show of hands, how many of you use AI today? Wow, impressive, but not surprising. So ChatGPT crossed 100 million users in 2 months. This number is impressive, given that Instagram did it in 2.5 years. Netflix took 10 years. Despite this impressive results, people don't know the difference between OpenAI and ChatGPT. That's what tonight is about, and more specifically about the consequences in terms of culture for your finance, strategic, and consulting work, and also for the tech people. Fortunately, we're not going to discuss these questions alone. We have 2 brilliant people, Valérie Foch and Pierre-Edouard Lip, who are go-to-market at OpenAI, meaning that they are the crossroads between tech and real world. Without further ado, I'll hand the floor over to Valérie Foch and Pierre-Edouard Lip. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much, Adrian, for having us, and for all of you for making time this evening. I know it's presumably been a long day and a beautiful one outside. It is a pleasure for us to join you here at HEC at the invitation of Adrian and his colleagues. So thank you very much for facilitating this session. We will be telling you a little bit about OpenAI, and I think Adrian pointed this out quite correctly. We get this often, that people forget who OpenAI is, but they certainly know what ChatGPT is. And so hopefully you'll get a little glimpse of what the organization does at a broader scale, and more importantly, how that is impacting and changing and growing lots of the things that you're doing today, and more than likely things that you'll do tomorrow. But really, most critically, we're here for you, and Pierre-Edouard and I have the pleasure of also being able to field some of your questions, and we encourage curious minds throughout. So that will be the primary of your focus. So questions. If you take anything away from today, any ask that I have, bring your curiosity and ask us lots of questions. Easy questions, though. Easy questions. Good. So without further ado, we're going to, of course, not only introduce ourselves and give you a very warm welcome, but our agenda today, as I had mentioned, will include a small overview of who OpenAI is, and then really the focus will pivot towards what does that mean in terms of impact for what you're potentially looking to do. I hear, obviously, finance and consulting and some of those very illustrious career paths, but that being said, speaking of illustrious career paths and the people in front of you, I mean, we're standing here as two alumni of HEC. So myself, I studied innovation and entrepreneurship here, and Pierre, who joins me, will explain a little bit what has brought him here. But the education that we've had and enjoyed here at HEC has been one of the highlights, I think, to get us to where we're at. Where that is for me, and the vantage point to which I come to this discussion is I lead education for OpenAI internationally. So I focus on what that means, AI in education, at the level of governments, universities, schools, parents, and children. So lots to say on all of those fronts, but I'll let Pierre-Edouard introduce himself.
So, hi everyone, my name is Pierre-Edouard, you can all call me PE. I'm not a true alumni of HEC, I'd rather be honest with you. I just did actually a certificate in 2014, so a long time ago. It was an 8 weeks program on leadership, hence why I'm still lucky to get an HEC email address, but that's the only thing I got. I'm actually a 42 École 42 alumni for the French people here, probably know the school. And indeed, that was a path that took me to OpenAI. Right now, I'm managing deployment at OpenAI. That means that when a customer signs a contract with us, they're going to be working with people from my team on how to best deploy ChatGPT Enterprise or using our technology. And so we're going to be their partners on their day-to-day operation on how to use our technology and hopefully bring value to the organization.
Perfect. So lots of things to ask him about later, obviously, hopefully, questions. But we're going to start with the company. So as many of you know, and I think the history has been written about how some of the models and labs were founded, and OpenAI actually has been around as an organization for quite some time. We're going to probably fast forward to that final section, and we're going to spend lots of time thinking about the 2022 to today part, and less so 2015 and that sort of run up to where we're at today. But what has in this time remained relatively true is we have big missions, big but simple missions. And perhaps we've thought of various different ways to get there from that early stage on what we can do with AI, but certainly the mission has been somewhat true all that time in that it is simple but ambitious. What we build is AI, and that AI is with a goal to building an artificial general intelligence that benefits everyone. And that can mean lots of different things, and we can unpack that together. But the fundamental part is that it benefits everyone. That's really about driving it forward with research, We're going to spend a bit of time about what that means for us, but also making that research and those outputs accessible and making them applicable to various different scenarios. So those scenarios can be education, but they can also be in the sort of future workplaces that you're looking at going into. They can be anything from healthcare to government. There can be lots of different things that you do with AI, but really the concept here is that it pushes forward those that thinking and those capabilities across multiple domains and have real-world impact. Now, OpenAI and numbers. We love numbers. So I should have done this as a reveal and gotten you to guess some of them, but unfortunately they're here with us now. So for many of you, and maybe we'll do another show of hands. We had probably, I would argue, around maybe, would you say 90p? Would you say 90% at least have used AI? Okay, probably. We'll say it's about 90% of this group. How many of you have used ChatGPT? Okay, similar number. Okay, similar number. So it might be good for you to know that makes you, now I might not assume you're using it weekly. How many of you use it weekly? That's also a very good number. Okay, so as you'll see here in the top right, you're one of 800 million people today. So this is probably my favorite statistic. For those of you acquainted with the rise of large language models or this particular branch of AI, so AI is a very broad topic. We must always remember LLMs are a small part in a big universe of things that AI is and can do. With that in mind, large language models, and particularly ChatGPT, has been around as a tool and available since November 30th, 2022. So we've just celebrated our 3rd birthday. And in that time, and today we count more than 800 million weekly active users, some of them amongst you today. But more critically, we've grown at a pace to help meet that interest, that unprecedented interest. And on the one hand, what we've seen as hugely exciting is that whilst lots of you will have used ChatGPT in its sort of current form, lots of you have built with it and developed with it. And today we have more than 4 million developers on the platform. And we're seeing that as a growing number, of course. And with that in tandem, of course, they've been starting to do really exciting things like build businesses and use it in the context of their businesses. And with that in mind, we're also helping to optimize for how you can explore and build and create with these types of tools. Today, that means we have 4,000 or so employees across the globe, around 12 offices, including one here in Paris, supporting the community of users and learners and explorers and developers and builders and dreamers that we have on the platform today. And that continues to grow. So we're seeing lots and lots more people joining on the platform. But what we're seeing and what we'll cover today is really that the use of these types of tools and the curiosity has been unmatched. In fact, I'll show you a statistic in terms of adoption, what that means in practical terms. P, do you want to cover this one? I feel like I've spoken for a long time.
Yeah, sure. So we just wanted to bring you the way we operate at OpenAI. You've probably heard that many times, but we are first a research lab, and so our goal, as Valerie mentioned, is bringing AI to benefit all of humanity. And so everything starts with research, and part of our job with Valerie is to apply this research to real-world examples and use cases and deploy those to different set of industries. And so I think the way we operate right now is this highly beneficial feedback loop where we get the chance to get on the field, to talk with customers, and to learn from them on how they can apply this wonderful technology to different set of business cases and different set of industries. And then we're going to take back those, those feedback, those details, insights on how we can also make our technology better. And that's, I think, really a huge differentiator across, different set of companies that provide similar services. Is research is at the core of everything that we do at OpenAI.
Wonderful. So I believe my favorite graph, well, my second favorite graph is coming up. We'll go with the second favorite one for this. So I think when we talk about research and we think about what AI does, and specifically we're going to dive in and hopefully also with your questions about really specific examples of what that means today in today's workplace, in your studies, and in various different ways. I think one thing to remember, it's 3 years old, and where we stand today and the pace of change has never been faster. And when I say never been faster, you can see that AI has grown at such a pace that it's outpaced the adoption of the internet and the computer. In fact, it's considered the fastest growing technology of all time. And I think that's hugely interesting to observe. Scary. Also for us, we were just talking before in how fast things are moving, and you can really feel it at OpenAI. And with that today, I'm hoping we're bringing you some, not just of the scary, but certainly that excitement, because I think that's really what we also feel and what we really enjoy about working in the field that we do, and also hope to encourage in you to think about and explore what that might mean for your future careers and also how you look to deploy these types of tools. It's very exciting on how this will continue to reshape what we do. Now, as I mentioned, in the first iteration, and for some of you may have used ChatGPT in iteration 1, and may remember in using it, it was fun, right? You could type things in and it gave you an output, and sometimes you were like, well, that looks blatantly wrong, or I'm not sure that's true, or it just took a long time. So if we cast our minds back to 2022, it was incredible, it was impressive, but really what it was is real-time predictive responses. So large language models are really there to think about what is the probable next word, what is the probable output that you're seeking, but it's really, that is what it's based on, and it felt like it in iteration 1. Now, in 2024, the real shift could be felt in that the models felt less like they were just predictive, but that they were reasoning. And we started to think about them as reasoning, and we introduced the sort of concept of reasoning capabilities into the model. And really the idea behind reasoning is that it takes a little bit longer, but it is far more accurate, and it's far more able to solve complex queries and problems and do so independently. So 2024 saw the first shift. The second significant shift that we've seen in this very short period is this concept of agents. You'll probably hear us talk a lot more about agents. I'm sure you'll talk about agents. I'd be surprised if you didn't. And I'm looking forward to what we're going to call it in 2026, because we haven't got a slide on that yet. But 2025 was the year of the agents. So this was really the shift from having something that could reason and fetch you an answer to something that could do things on your behalf. And that systems, those are able to support multi-step tasks. So not just workflows, but whole systems that can execute things on your behalf, and do that through the power of a written prompt or command or even voice. That's that real shift to agents. And we're seeing a lot of that paradigm shift continue to evolve into 2026. I'm sure if you're curious about all of these things, some of you might be aware of OpenClaw and lots of fun things in the AI world that have happened recently. The shift certainly continues into what agents can do and what we want to do with agents. So with that in mind, capabilities, what they can do. You can see them here. There's lots of words, and if you remember early on, if you were an early user of GPT, and I was one of them, you just chose the model with the highest number. You were like, that's going to be safest. It'll probably do what I need it to do. But in fact, what sits behind the models is actually lots of different capabilities that have been stacked over time to help you address certain different questions and problems, and we continue to evolve that. And in fact, last year we shifted gears and we introduced GPT-5. So you didn't have to remember what model you needed for what. In fact, the model just chose it for you to get you to the right result, and we continue to iterate and improve on those. Good. I'm going to hand over to PE, who's going to talk a little bit more locally about what we do, and specifically very local to France.
We can actually directly go to the Next slide. So just wanted to get you some understanding of what we're doing in France. First thing I wanted to say is that France is a very strategic market for OpenAI. Just sharing a few figures with you, but France is top 10 in the world in terms of number of paying customers, subscriptions, and is also top 10 in the number of developers using the API. And so that shows that France is actually a builder market. And so that's why it's also so interesting for us as a research lab is to work with those companies that are at the frontier of developing new technologies, new products. And so that's why we're investing lots of time and money in this French ecosystem. Obviously, Station F is the largest incubator in the world. And so having access to this great pool of engineers, business people that are building those early companies, again, being at the forefront of everything, is definitely key for us. One very, very specific thing about the French market is that we are lucky to also have Mistral, which is one of the only, let's say, 4 large language model that we have out there. All the other one would be in the US. And so that is very specific to the French market because that means we have tons of people also working at Mistral in this company, and Mistral is also a huge advocate of those technologies. So regarding our presence here, Paris is actually one of our major engineering hub that we have in the world. We have one of our most brilliant team that we call forward deployment engineers. Those people would actually work on very edge cases, use cases with our most strategic customers in the world. And Paris is actually the biggest FD hub that we have in the world. So lots of investment there. Obviously, we'll continue to grow the team here. Just a rough number, we're around 20-ish in Paris. Mainly go-to-market if you include FD in the go-to-market team. And as of today, we work with many different industries, but telco, pharma, media, retail, those would be today the industries that we're focusing on as a go-to-market team.
Fantastic. And I think really doubling down on that point, I think the fact that we stand here today, we're really looking forward to having in you also the sort of talent of the future. Now, not just the talent in France, but the talent globally, because we see HEC as very much a global talent hub, not just a local one. And similarly to OpenAI, when we think about that, we have very international folks everywhere across the globe. But that being said, we're going to talk a little bit about impact of AI into careers, and also maybe taking a moment to take a step back on considering what it means. My recommendations, I talk a lot about this, frankly, so feel free to ask me lots of recommendations, but how we think about that and what we'd love to do as part of this section will be really to get some of your questions as well, and perhaps maybe we start with your questions and then we end with advice. That feels best, doesn't it? So I would love to open up the floor to anybody here. We've got a load of mics that we can give round, or you have the pleasure of shouting at us to ask us questions that you might have, anything specific that you've always been curious about. I can't promise we can answer everything, but we'll try and make this as transparent and clear as we can. Oh, well, we have some prepared questions before your questions. Very good.
Thank you very much, Valerie, and sorry, what? Pierre-Edouard Pau, yes, for your presentation. So first question, since we are here at HEC, surrounded by students aiming for careers in finance and consulting, I have to ask the slightly provocative question. Should they still bother applying for internships, or will AI do their future jobs before they even graduate?
P, do you want to start?
So it's a very valid question. First, okay. There's no debate around that. I think what we're seeing right now, and there was a very interesting article on Les Echos this morning that was released, is that what we see on the market is that it's probably going to be like it was 20 or 30 years ago when everyone wanted to hire the best people that used to work in Excel. I think the baseline is going to be, are you using AI or not? But ultimately, the need is going to be proficient in AI. Are you a builder with AI? What skills did you develop? Workflows did you automate using AI? And I think that's going to be, obviously the market is going to shift a bit, but with those skills, you should have way more opportunities than you'd have before. The caveat being, you need to get those skills now. And so sometimes this is going to be part of the process within your years at uni. Sometimes it's not going to be. So it's going to be for you to balance, the needs of the market and what you can do. Within this article of Les Echos that was released today, one point was actually saying that they're going to hire, I think if I'm not mistaken, 4,000 people, but they all of those 4,000 employees that they were going to recruit right out of school, all of the exercise that those people were going to have to go through would be AI exercise. Okay, so I think that is something that we need to keep in mind. But I think forward looking, it's positive.
I would echo that, and probably sort of zooming out a little bit for the sort of educational context, the OECD, the body that assesses educational attainment across a range of countries and is used as a benchmark across 3 different domains, in 2025 introduced 2 new categories, one of which is AI literacy. That means 15-year-olds in 2029 will now need to be able to demonstrate AI literacy. What does that mean? Well, if we are to think about the changing face of jobs and do we apply for internships, the answer is very much a resounding yes, because the people behind you will be able to do those jobs because they will be AI native. And actually, I see a far greater opportunity for you to immerse yourself in AI now, where I actually see far greater concern is older generations adapting these. So I think there's equally an appeal to all generations to immerse themselves within AI. And for you, in terms of graduates, I certainly feel that the initial bumps, which will be, worrying about those entry-level jobs that you might want to go into that form the basis of internships and those first graduate jobs as you come into the workplace. Yes, we expect to see some ramifications, but your skills that you'll come into those organizations with will be wildly impressive. And I mean wildly impressive. You'll be able to do unprecedented things versus which some of the people that have been there will certainly not be able to. And I think that will really be an advantage that you have today. So it might feel scary and daunting, but I think it's a huge opportunity.
Thank you very much. And now we have a question about the competitive market on AI. So if we look at the competitive landscape today, the race is no longer limited to 1 or 2 players. We have Anthropic with Claude and Google with Gemini. So how does OpenAI differentiate today in a concrete way?
I can make a start here. Maybe I would say, first and foremost, I think one of the things that we're most excited about is anyone entering into the market validates that there is one. That's the first and foremost exciting thing that I would want to underline. So the fact that there are other labs, and to be honest, if you're familiar with the history of this domain, there have always been labs. So you might remember DeepMind and work from other organizations that has now evolved, and they have productized this, and that's become, for example, Gemini. And we have Microsoft, our sort of partner here, looking at evolving with the likes of Copilot, and then we have labs like Anthropic emerging as well. So all of this maelstrom has come together, and I think we're excited to see what they can do. Now, it might, and often potentially also to us, feels like we're all sort of pulling as quickly and competitively against each other as you might assume, and actually probably to a degree, that is true. Ultimately, the direction for all those companies is very similar to ours in that they aim to benefit all of humanity with their tools. So whether that's Facebook with Llama or questionably Grok with what they're doing. But we're all essentially pulling in the same direction that we want them to benefit everyone. And in that, we often also collaborate on pieces of work together. So we don't always just work in isolation. So those are the first and foremost things. Second point, of course, is around differentiation. So as there are many tools, which one do I use and what's good and so forth on the personal level? And secondly, how do I evaluate them all together? Now, there's lots of mechanisms to evaluate them. Some is on model performance, some is against performance against different tasks. And there's different organizations, tools, experts out there that actually evaluate them side by side on certain tasks. And we benchmark ourselves against each other and so on. So I encourage you to look at those. And there it is very much a race. You'll see us all racing forward on certain tasks. You'll be like, oh, 5-3, it's exciting. Yay, it's better than, Nana Banana and so on. So that certainly happens. Ultimately, ChatGPT remains the number one model by 7x the size of users against all of the others. Do we see that gap closing over time? Yes, potentially. Certainly the gap will start to narrow. But one of the big things is what the models do. So you probably are aware that ChatGPT has always been seen as the generalist. And what you're hearing from us here is really to becoming more specialist. So adapting into use cases and verticals in particular, how we work to support science, how do we support healthcare, education, and so on more specifically, and how do the models do that? And then one thing where we do see a real clear cut, we're trying to race at the same thing, is things like coding. So there you see Claude and Anthropic in particular strong points. So OpenAI, very broadly speaking, a generalist that is moving into supporting more specifically on verticals. That is currently the number one model for coding. Yes, very exciting. But you will continue to see all labs work together and evolve, and that we all aim to do the same thing.
Yeah, couldn't say better, to be honest. I think one point that is very key, you mentioned it, but like having competition is healthy. That's the first thing, okay? It pushes us to be better. On the point that Valerie just made for Codex, we were really behind last year. That was on us. Claude Code was much better. And so, that was a good competition. Now we're above what Claude Code can do with 5.3 that we released last week. So I think it pushes the frontier and the barrier. One thing that I see more and more on the go-to-market front is that, again, our positioning, I'm speaking like a broken record here, but like our positioning is we are a research lab, and so many companies decide to go with us because they want to move the frontier of research. So like one key example is Moderna in the US, for example, where we're doing lots of research with them on how can we accelerate drug discovery. And so you have like those pockets of industries that are really forward-looking, and they want to buy. They don't want to buy just a ChatGPT-like tool. They want to actually do the research with a lab like us to move forward their industry. And I think right now that's one of the huge differentiators that we have at OpenAI, is that you get access to those researchers, specifically when you're working in some key industries like healthcare, which is very keen and close to our heart. So that would be, I think, one of the biggest differentiators that we have also today in the market.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a maybe more personal question about basically your role at OpenAI, because I'm not sure that if the go-to-market role is very clear for everybody in the room. Could you maybe elaborate more on this and tell us what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Emails and Slack, mainly. Lots of emails and lots of Slack. So go-to-market is a relatively old term that's become quite fashionable in the technology industry and encapsulates different domains. But essentially, think about it as the sort of engine that is customer-facing, that is driving forward business growth. And that still seems really vague. So it encapsulates sales, marketing, it encapsulates post-sales support, it encapsulates deployment, and quite similarly to us. So that's what that looks like at a broad level, the day-to-day. Maybe you say what your day-to-day looks like.
Well, my day-to-day is deploying ChatGPT and our technology with our customers. So I spend most of my time with my customers. So either remotely delivering training, supporting them so they can understand, what are the best use cases they need to take into production. How do we, generate value? You're not just using ChatGPT for the sake of using ChatGPT and gaining a bit of productivity. Ultimately, you want to completely automatize some workflow. I was just one key example, very concrete example I learned actually in December a few weeks ago. I was working with one of my airline customers, and so one of the use case we found is that you usually have hubs with planes that are set on a specific route. Let's say Paris to Miami, for example, and so. They noticed that every time you have like a very huge event, so it could be the World Cup, usually you don't have enough planes to actually fly people from a hub to like somewhere else. And so they find that they could actually build with ChatGPT this event radar tracker where they could like anticipate like the events. The events could be anything, like could be a Taylor Swift concert because like so many people would fly to the city. And so reallocate like part of their fleet so they have more planes in advance on this specific route. And that's like lots of money, okay? We're talking millions of euros just on a single route. So like that is the kind of thing we're trying to unlock with our customers is, okay, you have access to this technology, but how this technology translates into an actual, business case for you, an actual value. So that's my day today. Feel very lucky because I'm working with so many industries, so many customers across EMEA and even in the US. So I get to learn on the field, like discover those use cases with my customers. But yeah, so that's what I'm doing as a deployment manager, and we'll have so many other jobs at OpenAI.
I know, I'm really jealous. He gets all of this. And he gets such a broad spectrum of customers to talk to. I mean, not to say that I don't love speaking to educational institutions and governments, but this is very cool. Yeah.
Now we have a question about creating value in organization. Assuming that value increasingly depends on deployment and integration, the next challenge lies within organizations themselves. Despite the hype and the bubble, if we can say, around AI, many companies struggle to move from a pilot, from a POC project to full-scale deployment. In your experience, why do so many AI initiatives fail to reach production? Is the bottleneck mainly technological, organizational, or leadership-driven?
Maybe just one thing, so about the AI bubble, okay? Just want to say one message here. So the word AI bubble is mainly from, people in finance that see a market gap. And that's fair. You can look at the P ratio and maybe there's a bubble in your sense. I think one very interesting thing that we need to do is like if you step back and let's take internet, when there were the internet bubble in 2000, what is the core metric that you're looking at for, like, is this the bubble or not? It's not the market cap. It's actually a core metric of this market. And so for the internet, that was the traffic. Okay, and so if you look at the traffic of the internet during the bubble in 2000, the traffic doesn't like go down, it just goes up, okay? So if you step back and you do the same thing for our industry, our new intelligence model, you look at the number of token, that you consume per day, and so the curve is the same. It's an exponential curve, it doesn't go down, okay? So on the AI bubble, it might be like a financial bubble, maybe this will pop or not, we never know. We already know it's a bubble when it pops, but just want to step back and say that from what we see internally, we just see more and more usage constantly every single day. Now onto the organization layer and I think this topic. So I think you probably refer to I think it was a BCG or something like this research. So I think there's two things there. First thing is that what it does is just that's a pilot and then it stops. That happens. What we see here is that usually there's also a lack of resources internally that understand how AI models work and how you take that to production, because it is a lot of work. And so on that front, and I think this is why we have also for our deployment engineering team, solution architects, experts that are going to teach and tell you what is the best architecture, how do you take that to production. And also we have to understand that taking a use case to production when you're a large company, it is highly complex, okay? I'm just going to talk about French telco. You maybe all know Orange in France. So Orange, like a lot of large company, they grew by acquiring a lot of other companies, so they bought a telco in Poland, they bought a telco in Ivory Coast, and they had and now they became this huge telco worldwide. What you probably don't realize or don't know is that, well, each of those sub has their own tech stack. So you build something and then you want it to push to production, and then, well, actually in Poland, we don't have the same tools, we don't have the same software, so we have to redo it again and to have to do another thing. And so I think this is one of the hurdles, we encounter when we are trying to develop and push everything to production, is that we need to anticipate those challenges. And so that takes time, that's complex, especially when you're a company as large as Orange, but you could name the CAC 40 or any top 50 company in every top country. So that's the first thing. The second thing is finding the use cases that make sense. It takes time. And it's not because you want to use AI and you're, I have this brilliant idea. That never happens, almost never happens. So usually the process is actually threefold. I'd say you start with using ChatGPT or any similar tool, because you start to automatize part of your work, ask questions, and then you get an answer, and then you start to understand the tools you have access to. And then you move on to the second phase, which usually is you build your own little assistant, a GPT or an agent, whatever it is. But that is like a second phase. You need like probably a quarter or two to get acquainted with the technology, and then you start to automatize pieces and little bits of your workflow that you have during the day. It could be generating a weekly report, a financial analysis, and then after maybe 2 other quarters, so you're already a year out, you start to see like the bigger picture, what you could take from A to Z, but that is not an existing process. It's all something you're rebuilding from the ground up, and that takes another, additional time. So I think, to this research, probably, the number I think is, clickbait in a way, but it's just, the reality is just that the market is moving forward. It just takes time. It's a new technology. People need to get acquainted to it. There's only a handful of people on Earth today that completely master how to take something from a prototype to a production. But the thing is, people are doing it and are doing it more and more. And I think one of the key message here is that we, like us, Valerie and myself, one of our job is to take this, be the shepherd of AI and like take our knowledge and explain it to our customers so they understand what is the full process to go to production, but it's not going to happen overnight. It takes a long time.
Okay, thank you. We were talking about frontier models like a few minutes ago, and I have actually 2 questions about this. First one, do you think that the competitive battle right now is primarily about frontier model performance, or is it more about the ecosystem control and how you can distribute the model to basically everyone? And second question, do you think it's still possible for a European company to build and sustain a frontier model?
Multi-layered question. Frontiers or not frontiers? So where is the market going? What are the companies doing? Broadly speaking, I would say the corpus of what LLMs have done and the amount of information they hold and the performance that they have is going to increase incrementally, I think. Where the next sort of, I suppose, frontier is applying what LLMs can do to specific topics. So on the one hand, I mentioned it earlier, how do we solve problems in healthcare and science, and how do we really apply into these sort of vertical stacks to think about not just what can an LLM do from a horizontal perspective. I think we've all kind of reached that point, and we're going to see improvements in all of the models, but I think it's really thinking more about how do we integrate that to create, to your point, value, right? So value at the organizational level, whilst all of the model makers will continue to care about personal productivity, and some, and quite a few of them actually, like Meta is a really great example. They talk about that sort of personal assistant in your pocket. That will continue to form perspective, but I think if we're really looking at organizational and societal change, I think that more vertically integrated picture will come to the fore. Certainly that's how I would see it today. Can I speak for all model makers today? Probably not, but from my vantage point, that's certainly the trend that we're seeing. And you'll notice with the likes of Claude and Gemini, looking at how they work better in an integrated fashion. So it also rings true for the time being.
Thank you. And as Europeans, we are a bit scared about European competitiveness. So from an operational perspective, how much does the European data regulation shape enterprise adoption today? Is it a friction point, or is it already adopted and integrated into deployment strategies?
I'm happy to take this one. I mean, it's a great question if you would like. I mean, look, he doesn't even want it. Great question. So certainly we see in Europe overall legislation moving in such a direction to ensure that we're safeguarding some of the ideals and enshrining those into law. Those ideals include things like transparency and competitiveness and ensuring that the market here is able to address them. And as a result, obviously, we're also seeing some larger and some more nascent and some national model makers. So when I say larger, I mean Mistral. When I say nascent, there's one in Germany called Black Forest, I think. Somebody can correct me on this one. They're doing some really cool work, actually. I see nodding. See, yes, somebody knows and exactly what I'm talking about. They're doing some really cool work, actually. And then we're seeing national LLMs. So that's where a nation is looking to build their own models, or where they're looking to at least partner and host, rather than working off the back of some of the tooling provided by the big labs. So we are seeing that. And that's driven by wanting the control, wanting also really deeply that transparency. And then, like I said, here the legislature at the European level with the EU AI Act is driving that to become more prevalent. How do we feel about that? At OpenAI, certainly we see that impacting a little bit our strategic direction. As would any organization, we have to think about what our customers think about. And we need to think about that very deeply. And that means not just compliance, but that also means addressing some of those concerns. Now, there are aspects of the EU AI Act around transparency that makes it very difficult for model makers. I won't go too deeply into that, but you can probably imagine. It means they're just exposing a whole corpus of training, which is very unlikely. But what it does mean is that we get to share in that discussion together, actually, and think about something very deeply. And from my perspective, where I work with education and governments, I really welcome the fact that here in Europe we have to have such an enlightened conversation together. That's not just driven by law, but that's driven by culture and some of those conversations. And I think actually that's super exciting, since it also means we as an organization get better, right? So as a direct result of some of these concerns and conversations, we have our open weight models to allow for those to build and host here. It's driven us to move infrastructure more locally, and also to sort of address some of that in the sort of model design themselves. So I think that sort of push and those concerns actually just make us better and make us think more deeply about how we address some of those concerns here.
Just to add on that, being on the enterprise side, what I see is that, so first, ChatGPT is GDPR compliant. All of the data is hosted in Europe. We signed also the AI Act. I think we were the first lab to do it. So from the enterprise perspective, we check all of the boxes from compliance and security. The only thing where, you'd have lots of discussion would be everything related to defense and government in Europe, where, it makes sense, why, take the risk potentially, even though that's not our perspective, but that is a fair discussion. But on the enterprise side, usually, as long as you are GDPR compliant, in our case, you signed the AI Act, then it's just about I want to choose the best model or the company that is going to bring me the best partnership, or the company that has the best capabilities towards the use cases I want to achieve. So I've rarely seen this as a blocker, except again in those very specific industries, defense and anything related to government.
Okay. We talked about frontier model before. As we inch closer to the reality of AGI, artificial general intelligence, the enterprise narrative is shifting from simple, isolated productivity tool towards systemic cognitive transformation, what some are beginning to call OGI, organizational general intelligence. From your vantage point leading go-to-market at OpenAI, when you look past the immediate horizon of today's APIs and enterprise deployments, what is the foundational blueprint of the company of tomorrow? Ultimately, what is the grand promise you are making to enterprise leader regarding our value creation, strategic decision-making, and human capital will be fundamentally restructured in a post-AGI world?
All right, again, really big question. Maybe let me start smaller. But compliment, by the way, on all of the great questions, and I'm hoping obviously, once we get to the audience, we'll hear more of these. So AGI, as we see it, is where we're going. I think already what we're seeing with respect to agents and systems of agents performing tasks gives us some indication of what that organizational general intelligence might look like. Now, this is futurist thinking, right? So in some ways, I can't give you a great answer. There are teams at OpenAI that can give you a far better, more qualified and cogent answer. But taking a first stab at this, you saw on our slides earlier, we've gone from predictive real-time outputs, where it just guesses essentially very intelligently the next word, to reasoning, which is essentially being able to execute smaller tasks, but doing so more reliably, and they're slightly more complex than in version 1. And then finally, we're now at that sort of agent level, and those agents are continuing to evolve. Where we're at today is agents work majority in isolation with one another, sort of from one another. And these agents will work to perform tasks. What I see in the more immediate future, because AGI still feels big and scary probably at that frontier, is that agents actually start to work with each other in a way. And so therefore, from an organizational perspective, that you might have teams of agents that will work to execute certain business tasks and functions. That is probably the near term. Now, where they become sort of to the AGI level, I think it's still a question on what that means. But I think if I look at the horizon of agents, it gives us some runway and some indication, and I would say that's probably on the horizon for this year.
I'm not sure what to add, to be honest. I think just it still feels a bit far away, to be honest. We don't know when it's actually going to be there. And still, I think something that we've seen the past year with Valerie is internally we call this the capability overhang. And so what you can see is that the models can actually do so much things today, but the reality is people use probably 10% of the capability of the model. So I think one of our job this year is going to be to try to bridge this gap and to make sure people can actually use the full capabilities. And I think until we're there, it's going to be hard to project ourselves onto what is a company with AGI, to be honest. So it's going to take a few more years.
Thank you. And our last question, for OpenAI's own growth, what kind of profiles are most in demand? So purely technical, business focused, or hybrid talents?
So right now at OpenAI, the way we hire as a company is very specific because we're growing so fast. So the reality today is that in the majority of the office that we open in different countries, we're looking at highly skilled individuals that already know the market. Usually you'd look at someone that has 8 to 10 years experience. That is the way we operate today. That doesn't mean that's the way we're going to operate in the future. We're actually started to hire interns in San Francisco and in the US. But right now, you want to have people that are ready on day 0, and maybe even you start the job, because you have people that already worked in that space, know the region, know the customers, know the technology. I think one common theme that we're seeing at OpenAI, and maybe Valerie, correct me if you feel differently, is that we're looking for more and more technical people. So, either you are working with universities and government, or myself working with so many different enterprises and industries. It comes down to the models, and our technology. And so you need to be acquainted with, obviously, what is machine learning, how does it work, what is a LLM, how do you build one, how does inference work? And I think we're looking to get more and more technical. In lots of people in my team, we all come from pure business side, business school, but I think you could see that people ramped up a lot on the technology. And so most of, let's say, people in my team that are pure business-oriented people that worked in technology company before, that would be most of the time highly technical technologies. So again, this can always evolve, but I think at least today, that's the picture I'm seeing personally. I don't know if you have a different feeling.
No, I would, by and large, actually agree. And I haven't been at OpenAI quite as long as you have. But one of the shifts I've seen certainly is more of an emphasis on some of that technical expertise. What that is to say, though, I think to really emphasize, OpenAI is passionate about hiring the best and really moving the needle. And that can be that your skills are acquired in non-linear fashion. So that's not to say that you have to follow traditional career paths necessarily. We don't so much care about that. If you are technically brilliant or if you stand out in what you do, we will consider those candidates. We really look for talent everywhere, and it has to be the best. P was saying this. We have recently started to look at different pockets of talent. So one is emerging talent. So that's things like internships. That's a really new thing for us. We've not really done many internships. We have a researcher program. We hire in some of our research oftentimes. Internships, we tend to hire about 90% of our interns because they're brilliant when they come to us, and then we just want to keep them. So with that in mind, those sort of emerging talents have increasingly become part of that story. And like I said, they don't come always with those most traditional of backgrounds. One thing then to say, I think, for anyone considering here careers in OpenAI, and speaking to Adrian and the team, actually, not necessarily. Many of you are considering careers in finance and consulting and so forth. But if you did consider OpenAI as part of your journey at one point, I think the key takeaway to have here is, first of all, be highly curious. So curious about AI. Passionate about what it can do in fields that you're entering into, and building some of that understanding and expertise, I think now is really fundamental. It's not necessarily just fundamental to working at a frontier lab. In fact, I think from what we've said to you today, it will be fundamental to what you're going to be doing in future, regardless. And then what I would say, another really sort of key component is being able to be agile and actually, and this is a real key part of our job, I think it's a very fluid environment. We have been here for quite some time. One of the things that I believe we both love, and I speak for hopefully both of us about it, is no 2 days are the same. We get an enormous amount of excitement about bringing in lots of different colleagues to tackle really big problems together. And doing so in a way that you really feel that you're changing the world. So with that in mind, my advice to anyone here is, if you enjoy that sort of thing and you're going to get excited about that, I would go and learn lots about AI, gain some experience, and then consider working for a company like ours.
Yeah, just to add on that, and share an insider detail, Sam is obsessed about hiring builders. Like, that's always what he's saying. So, like, the senior leadership team at OpenAI, like, when they say to someone, you need to hire someone, they just go, you need to hire someone that could actually build his or her own company. And that's, like, one of the key themes you can find across the whole employee base that we have, is everyone has tremendous ownership. And that's needed when you grow at our pace, because no one is going to tell you what to do. And it moves every single day. You've seen the graphs where, how many features we release. Can you imagine how much hour we need to put in with Valerie on just learning the new features that we need to present for our customers? It's completely insane. So I think, have this builder mindset. That would be key. And I really think not even for OpenAI, not just for OpenAI, for a lot of companies out there, because the paradigm is going to shift with this technology, and you can build whatever you want with it. So I think that's one of the huge opportunities that you're going to have in the next few months or years.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Valerie, PE, Magloire, and Noah. Now we're going to do a quick Q&A with the room, if anybody has some questions.
Oh. I'm excited. It's almost as many people who have used ChatGPT, which is exciting.
Thank you. I'm going to choose some questions because I have many questions, but just briefly, I'm Fiorlana Misch-Lazare. I worked as an intern actually for Mistral AI for 8 months. I'm not there anymore, in the go-to-market team. So it's nice also to know your point of view. My questions, mainly one regarding your background, that I saw you also worked for software companies. That's just very recent news, but kind of regarding the sell-off of like some software company stock, I wanted to know what's your outlook, what would be your outlook on the future of software companies and how AI and opportunities also for OpenAI in this field in kind of grasping that territory.
I think you have tremendous opportunities on the software space. I think the only a key theme that you need to be aware of when you apply at a software company is, are they moving with AI? I think we are so lucky, especially in France and in Paris, to have such a dense ecosystem. But I couldn't have so many companies that are AI driven. So top of my head, Pigment, for example, Datadog, Alan. There's so many companies that have AI at their core of their processes, and so of course you have lots of legacy software companies, and the market is freaking out. And we'll see. All of those companies can actually evolve, can actually migrate or change or upgrade their stack. But I do think in France, if you're looking at just the tech ecosystem, you have tremendous opportunities to do something meaningful with companies that are very well built and that have strong foundation for the future.
And just my second question was regarding, I'm very interested and curious about world models, and I want to know kind of the view of OpenAI on that. And as you really put emphasis on collaborating with the research community, what about in manufacturing and robotics? Where does kind of OpenAI play in that?
I'm happy to take it.
Yeah.
Okay. So lots of you will obviously know that LLMs is just one part of the story. I mentioned AI is a very broad field. Much of the narrative recently, and that's not least through the slightly acrimonious departure of Jan LeCun from Meta last year, has shifted towards considering real-world models. Most of you are aware that the likes of Elon's companies are building some of the more robotic elements, and OpenAI is no different, right? We do have that strand there. It's not really core. It's sort of a bit more on the fringes of obviously what we're doing today, but we certainly also see that directionality into real world for sure.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Thank you so much for taking the time. Mark, I've been through the HEC Incubateur program, and my question to you is, what is there to learn from the public's reaction when you retired 4.0 in terms of building products? What is there to take away to say, well, what we should be doing and what we should no longer be doing going forward? Thank you.
Well, I'm not an expert, okay, so that's just my personal point of view. I do think you have way more noise than what's the actual state out there, to be honest. What we've seen since 5.2, and 5 was definitely something that we could have improved when we released it, but the result and the survey that we sent across our 800 million weekly active users is that 5.2 is a tremendous model. So there's definitely always a Reddit vibe where you have a subreddit and everyone gets crazy. I'm not sure that's representative of the market and what we see, to be honest. And I think it's just, as a company, we also need to evolve, and we're not going to be able to maintain all of our legacy models. And so at some point, we need to do this transition. It's not easy for everyone. Lots of people had a very personal and deep relationship with 4.0. I think internally we're very conscious of that. We're trying to find the right balance because it needs to be something that is okay. We have researchers that's their work, and we have team dedicated to this. But ultimately, to your point earlier, what I was saying is that from our perspective and from what we see on the market, 5.2 is much, much better, and people like it way more than what we had with 4.0.
Hi, Jules here. I'm a student at ACL School of Engineering at La Défense. I was thinking about what will be the small language models doing in the future in big companies because of the implementations and necessities of big companies about security and all those stuff. And what's the view of OpenAI right now about small language models implementations in those big companies?
Good question. So small language models certainly drive a certain narrative. And that narrative, I think you've correctly identified, is really about security and ensuring that you have visibility and the models perform against your own data sets and so forth, and that is the controllability and so forth against that. My experience, and I mentioned obviously the sort of arenas that I most often operate within, small language models feature less because we don't tend to see them at the sort of macro level of governments and education as much. But where we see them applied is sensitive scenarios. Now, what is preventing them from wider adoption, or why not as many companies as I see it are considering them, is twofold. One is you have to build and train the thing. You then have to maintain it, and it's isolated onto your data sets. Whereas on the flip side, you could look at using a large language model and customizing it to your specific environment. And we're seeing a big push by pretty much all the model makers on interconnectivity and interoperability of systems. So through the things like MCP connectors and APIs, and actually extending our capabilities across different tech stacks as more effective, unless you're really looking at sensitive scenarios. So small language models, yes, but limited in scope, and I think also in deployment.
Yeah, just to add on that, what we've seen on the market is like a few years ago, let's say 2 or 3 years, the most advanced companies were the one building their own model internally, and then that shifted last year. The reason is what Valerie mentioned. You need to maintain it. You need to ship features, etc. Well, actually, that's okay. The thing is, if you look at the players in the field right now, so Anthropic, Google, Mistral, and OpenAI, we ship so fast that it's impossible for you as an enterprise to follow the pace at which we release feature. The problem is actually also the fact that all of those models are accessible by everyone. So you, as an individual, you have maybe ChatGPT in your pocket and you use all of the features and tools of ChatGPT. So when you get to your enterprise and you use the model that they built internally, you're like, why can't I just upload a picture? Why cannot I use like this agent? And so very rapidly you see people like getting back to their tool that they have, personally, because they have way more capability. So again, fully aligned with what Valerie said, makes sense for very sensitive industries because you cannot share the data outside of your enterprise, your data centers, your country. I think apart from that, what we're seeing right now on the market is, I think tools or models like us make way more sense for the enterprise when you get out of those industries.
Good evening. I'm Fanette, and I'm working as a student with some nonprofits in education. So thank you first for this really energizing talk. I have a question for you, Valerie. You've recently announced education for countries. Can you tell us a bit more about it? And how would you envision France as being one of your maybe testing environments, and which use cases we could implement in our ecosystem?
It's like you're a plant. It's one of my favorite things to talk about, and you didn't even know it. So we were super proud and excited to launch an initiative last year. So I'll start a little bit at the beginning, because my answers are usually quite long-winded. So we're going to go back to last year, and then we're going to talk about the announcement which happened this year. Last year, we were fortunate enough to be in a position to announce something called OpenAI for Countries. And in the true spirit of OpenAI, and really that thinking bigger and thinking as enormously as we possibly could, the idea was born that we could work with governments on sort of 4 different components it was originally, and I'll go into the education part in a moment, to help them prepare for a world that is going to feature AI. And it's going to feature AI where governments will need to think about it, both for their internal processes, so how can we make governments more efficient? That was quite a trendy thing, if you'll remember, making governments more efficient, cutting departments and costs and so on. But then also to think about how can we prepare generations of the future? How do we ensure we're driving value in areas like healthcare? And then really a big one is obviously infrastructure. How can we support infrastructure of nations to do it? So that was an announcement we did last year, and almost in tandem to which we had the good fortune of partnering with a really interesting and pioneering country. It's a small country in Northern Europe, sort of clinging on to the Baltic Sea in Estonia. So Estonia actually was one of the first who really had a very bold vision emerging out of the pandemic, where they said, well, actually, look, the way teaching and learning has been delivered has changed, because ultimately we were all sitting inside trying not to talk to each other and infect each other with COVID, and yet maintain educational development for our children. And how do we do that? So they did a really big investment not only into digital infrastructure, but then starting to think about how does AI impact that. And they approached us last year to start to think about how can we do that together. And that sort of spurned the idea, together with this concept of OpenAI for Countries, how can we do this at scale? So fast forward to this year, and we were very proud to announce 8 strategic partners. They're not the only ones. The other ones are a little bit more shy. I'm sure you'll hear about them in future. But the idea there is that we take these ambitious nations and start to think programmatically about how can we bring AI into those education systems under strict supervision, both on grounds of safety and equitable access. So really those 2 components are really the yardstick. How can we work together with educators? And then finally, how can we continue to monitor how it's impacting young minds, how it's impacting jobs of the future? So the program really is designed to support everything from K-12 educators all the way through to higher education, to look at how does it shape our minds? So how does AI change the way I learn and I think? All the way through to how does it change the types of jobs that I can get? So we, as part of those first cohort of 8 that we announced at Davos this year, are looking to expand the program. And to your point about France, we're super interested to do something in France. I can't talk too much about it. I know it's all hush-hush, but we're definitely very excited to hopefully share something in the near future about how we can do this here more locally in France.
Good evening. I have a question regarding the environmental impact. We all know that AI-based generative chatbots like ChatGPT consume a significant amount of water, but also a lot of electricity due, for example, to the maintenance of the data centers. My question is, how does OpenAI plan to address these challenges? Thank you.
So, first thing, when we talk about like the consumption of electricity for OpenAI, there's 2 things. There's the training of the models, and then there's the consumption of the models. So the consumption being UChat. When talking about just a chat with ChatGPT, the consumption is actually less than the Google search. What takes a lot of resources is training the models, okay? On that front, today, our main partner is Azure, Microsoft, as you may know. They pledged to be carbon neutral by 2030, okay? So that's the first thing. Now we have another stream that is starting, which is we're starting to build our own data centers, and obviously building the electrical infrastructure to so it powers the data center is very key to make sure that this is neutral net carbon initiatives. So cannot say much on this because it's still a work in progress inside of OpenAI, but that is very key to the way we're thinking about the future of building our own data centers. I don't know if Valerie, you want to add something.
I think you covered most of it. I think there's additional components, I think, to bear in mind as well. It's data centers are one thing. Data centers host servers, servers do things. And in those servers, we have chips. And one of the things that we're working on with the chip makers, of course, is making those chips more effective so that we don't have to consume as much energy. So there is also another dimension there. All in all is to say that it gets leveled at model makers and us because we're the biggest, certainly often. And it's something that we hear and sort of certainly pains me. My background is in sort of sustainability and sustainability tech. It pains me to have this conversation, but it's one that I think is helpful to have, and one that we're hoping to address by thinking through how can we be more efficient in what we're doing, and providing the service to those that use it today in a way that feels like we can move the needle quickly on it, that be through partnerships, through having our own data centers, through driving forward the chip conversation, but also exerting pressure on the infrastructure partners that we have today, such as Microsoft, to meet some of those targets for 2030 and so forth, so that we can meet our obligations. I think there's lots there, but yeah, something quite dear to my heart, for sure.
So, hi. You mentioned that OpenAI has a significant client base in the pharmaceutical sector, like you talked about Moderna, etc. So I was wondering, could you elaborate on the specific use cases and strategic challenges that big pharma companies are trying to address with AI, for instance?
Well, I think mainly it relates to what I was mentioning earlier is every single pharmaceutical company wants to be able to release drugs much faster. Currently, it takes a lot of time, takes lots of researches, takes lots of time to make sure you do the adequate tests in order to release the drug. And so that is taking today a tremendous amount of time. And so I think one of the mindsets, if you hear the CEO of Moderna, I think I don't know if we'll reach that point at any point in the near future, but he's obsessed with saying, tomorrow you get a blood test, and the next day we tell you everything that's going to happen in the rest of your life, So like that would be the ambition, and so, but we don't know how much time it's going to take. But I think the speeding of releasing drugs, that's like the very key thing. You have something actually very similar into the industry level, like materials. Like finding new materials take a lot of time as well. So it works similarly to discovering drugs. You make lots of tests. Then on top of those tests, you take like the most promising subsets. And then on those like top 10 subsets, you actually do the real life test. The cool thing with Gen AI is that you can actually extrapolate those tests. And so your subset is much more of much more quality, right? And so the question is, can we get to those top 10 that is high quality, high value? And so ultimately, one of those benefits would be you release drugs much faster that are actually much more adequate towards your disease. But on the other front, there is also a theory where we could find newer material that would be much cheaper, don't pollute, and are much more resistant, but we need to find like those top 10 subsets. So I think broadly in the industry, this is what we're trying to achieve. We're not there yet, obviously, but that is part of our research team is actually dedicated towards those goals.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, I'm Aditya, and thank you very much for this insightful discussion. Just to give context, I build more using your platform than use it personally. So with that aside, I'd like to zero in more on the education side and maybe more on the grassroots level. So it's nice that we are having this discussion at a high level with the nations and their education departments, but at the same time, we all are using it and we are finding our own way, at least in terms of individual classes or schools. So my question for you is, given that right now we are going through a retrospective legislation on social media, even in France, for example, instead of waiting another decade perhaps, what kind of conversations you're seeing about students in middle to high school using these tools in class and outside of class? And what kind of discussions you would like to see schools make or decisions they should rather make in the current moment? Thank you.
I think a good question. On the part of educators and students using it, I think there is a big question first and foremost around at what level and age it's appropriate to use, and that's also dictating some of those narratives that we see today in Europe, but also Australia, which was the first country. Spain and Greece are likely to follow swiftly. Certainly from what I've heard from my colleagues in Greece, that's very swiftly coming in, and we know it's happening in Spain. There's debates going on in France and in the UK, and that really is leveled at a couple of different things. So one, and I'll talk about how that pertains to AI in a moment, but one that is about overuse or dependency, and one is atrophy, and that's really where we're leveling it more at AI. So that's one. Today, none of the model makers would recommend using AI sort of sub 13, so none of them would allow for you to use it. In fact, we don't encourage it under 16, and here at OpenAI, I never deploy to under 16. So there are certain age ranges that are gated and that we ensure that we guard for, and that usually is operationalized through means like parental controls and so forth. Much like you have in sort of screen time and social media, we're seeing a very similar thing in AI, so allowing for a certain amount of usage, certain amount of messages, certain age groups, parental controls, and security flags. So those are some of the elements. Notwithstanding, we do see a place for AI in education also at various different levels. And then how do we do that? So research suggests, and we work continuously on that. You heard me mention sort of learning outcomes. We work with sort of Stanford, MIT, also with other model makers to think about how do we optimize models for learning in certain environments. Learning actually is our #1 use case. So you saw the big number, the big 800 before. 40% of those are under 24. The #1 use case is learning. So we think about it deeply. It's probably the most important use case we have today, to my mind. You might disagree, but I think it is. So what does that mean? Effectively, we have to build a model to optimize for it. So last year, we introduced something called study mode, which moves us away from question-answer, but into Socratic learning. And then this year, there's a really interesting debate going on as a result of the OECD and Brookings study, which took lots of different studies and lots of different observations around the use of AI in an educational setting and asked the question, is it effective? And it's a big question. And the answer is actually, it is. It's highly effective, but only in certain circumstances. And what does that mean? Well, actually, question answer isn't that effective if you're using it in the context of certain age groups because people can't discern and it makes you lazy, is the sort of takeaway of it. But if you're using it and you're informed or you're using it in certain circumstances, it actually accelerates your learning and particularly also helps us to obtain learning outcomes in user groups that will benefit from a more personalized approach, so who don't do well in a one-to-many scenario or want to use it for reinforcement of learning, etc. There we're seeing it being highly effective. What the net is, it is very effective. We continue to see that. I think from our perspective, the way to use it will range differently according to different age ranges. So the guidance here is that we work very closely with governments to think about that and to ensure that we're advising them accordingly, right? We don't presume that they will do as many research studies as we do into it, but we want to work very collaboratively on it. And we do that here in France as we do with governments elsewhere as well.
Thank you everyone for attending this conference. Time is running out. We're just going to do one last question.
Yeah, good evening, Pierre Walter. I have a question for you, Valérie, linked with your education focus. I work at Polaria, a French company helping French also companies to adopt the full potential of models like yours. And we also launched a research share studying the impact of AI on the organization and management. So a question linked to this, you talked about how AI is shaping young people's mind. About that, I had a question for you, because a concern that something concerning parents and also young people, students, is the critical thinking. I wanted to add the view on OpenAI about this topic, because we know that if ChatGPT gets better, it's also easier for students to outsource their critical thinking, their full thinking to AI. So I know about you talked about the study mode, study and learn on the feature on OpenAI, but on a more big picture, how OpenAI, what is the strategy on this?
Yeah, I think the big picture on that one, and again, a great question. What matters most in terms of learning outcomes or obtainment is this concept of productive struggle. And we've all had it, right? We've been confronted with something that's just slightly more difficult than we'd like. Now, you're quite right. In referencing critical thinking, it's not just it's more difficult than we thought. Critical thinking is actually a slightly more complex topic. Now, what study mode does, and this is what we're also seeing other model makers sort of develop, is this concept, obviously, of it's trying to level set and get you there through a question and answer. Similarly, like a teacher would ask you to try and elaborate, so what's your point of view, and ask you the questions. Now, from my perspective, of course, there's always the concern that students will use it to offload something cognitively, and that it would be in that scenario. From my experience in deploying it into educational settings, of course, that's something we guard against. And what we're looking at from a product perspective is how do we, much like we do with GPT-5, for all of you that are already familiar with and heard me talk about the model picker, so how do we use the same type of thinking and functionality to switch if someone is trying to learn and sort of preempt that you're trying to learn and help guide you to the topic. And we're looking at different ways that we can bring that into the product to ensure reinforcement of learning. Now, will people potentially still think about outsourcing the same way that you and I would outsource some questions to the calculator? Probably. That's to be presumed. Or the same way that I could probably find my way somewhere, but I'm probably going to use Google Maps, etc. So that sort of outsourcing already occurs in a much smaller scale on different tasks. For us, it's really to ensure that it doesn't occur at great scale in an educational setting.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Valérie. Thank you, Pierre-Edouard.
Okay, we're just gonna do a quick photo if you mind coming to the first row, please. With everyone.
Juste devant là. Juste devant, c'est bien. Et on fera après. Qui veut la conf, genre. Non, c'est ça qui bug et nous on est au milieu. Non, mais sinon on se met là et quelqu'un prend la photo là. C'est parfait. C'est vraiment juste bizarre. Tout le monde fait ça. Attends. Je veux une conf avec tout le monde. Non, mais on se met là. Après, bah après. On dit maintenant. On fait la photo, Pierre, elle sera.